kind of controlling how I'm doing those cuts and making sure that I'm not exposing myself to unnecessary risk. There's risk in everything, but obviously if we can minimize that. So I'm just carving out a bowl here, going in kind of at an angle to make sure that I'm not removing a big hole of material going straight down in. So you guys can kind of see we've got a divot here that this thing's going to ride in. And what I need to do next is I need to match this up to this to make sure that I'm going to have constant friction on this thing. And so we do what we call burning it in. And you can see it's already been done here. And essentially we're just going to do a bow drill with no intent of creating a coal or for a fire. And the idea behind this is now I know exactly where the edges are and I know exactly where the center is. And that tells me where I need to make my notch so that my coal dust can fall out and turn into a coal. So you guys want to pass that. When I was talking about that resin turning glassy, that's a pretty good example there. And it just looks like black glass or dragon glass or whatever you want to call it down in that thing. Feeling like maybe a slop from there. Well, that'll be all right. That'll give me an opportunity to show you guys how I would make it if I was doing it. So once we have our divot put in, and you can see on this guy, this one was taken a little bit too far, but we've essentially cut out a slice of the pie, right, on this. And then once we do that, we do that a couple different ways. If you have like a Leatherman or a Gerber that's got a little saw on it, I recommend that. It's really easy. But I do want to throw out there, as silly as it may sound, those saws, whether it's a big silky saw or something like this guy here, or even those little Leatherman saws, they'll cut you way worse than you want to be cut. I'd rather be cut with just a straight blade than one of those things. So even if it's not very big, set this thing down and make sure that you're being careful with it. One other thing that I want to mention, because it's a really big deal, if you're sitting down on a stump or a chair, we don't want to ever be cutting into this region here, anywhere in towards us. Just don't do it. So we've got our notch cut in, and then you can kind of see, once we have our V, we want to come in at an angle from this back side as well. So we wind up with kind of two angles going on. And in this whole process, this is probably the most dangerous part, and how I have to hold this to get that in there, because I'm pointing the blade at my soft tissue. So just be careful. So if you can see, I've got it kind of opened up that way also.
What is the focus?
It's twofold, so it's going to give a wider base for this coal dust that we're going to create to fall down, and it's going to allow airflow. That's not very good. Maybe I can get one out of this. Let's see if I have one. So I'm going to have 2 points on my spindle. This one's too long for me, but I don't want you guys to have to endure me trying to whittle this thing out. I think I can make it work as is. I'm I'm going to have one pointed or sharpened point. I'm going to have one point that's dull, it's flattened off, because I want as much wood-to-wood contact for friction in physics to do the thing. And this is really good. We'll see. Now, when I harvest this stuff, and I recommend this to you, when you go out to harvest material, harvest enough for 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 different sets of this stuff. Because if your camp area is a mile from where you found good material and you get back, and for whatever reason moisture content was too high or something, and you're already probably calorie deficient, your immune system's starting to go, last thing you want to do is have a really bad failure and then have to walk another mile to go get stuff. And I can tell you, I've made kits, I've spent so much time on kits before you would have thought it was a store-bought kit, and it didn't work. Maybe the moisture content was too high, resin content, but instead of getting really, really frustrated and mad, I just set it down and reached over and grabbed another set to start working on. And then once you have that stuff, keeping it dry is really important. But harvest enough to do more than one at a time, and it'll probably lower your frustration level. I'm going to try and be successful when I do this, so I'm going to start another thing here. But it'll be good in that you'll actually get to see the process of the burn in and see how that worked out. And while I'm thinking about it, there is one more component that's actually fairly critical that I want to mention to you guys. When I start doing this and get to the point where I'm going to create a coal, I want to make sure that I'm not on material like this wet grass. So if that means I'm on a rock or another piece of wood, whatever the case might be, but oftentimes I'm also going to need something that will let me catch that coal and keep it dry. And so I can use a shaving from when I'm trying to flatten my kit out so that my coal will drop onto that, and then I can later pick it up and dump it in my timber bundle. I can use a dry leaf, something like that, but this material that we're going to create is really, really dry. So even touching it with your hands, the oils from your fingers is going to just soak right up into it really quickly. So whatever it's going on to needs to be dry as well. So, okay. Maybe be dry enough to have it. If I didn't have a tarp, I'd use a jacket. Do whatever, because that's going to lead to shelter. It's going to lead to warmth, but it's going to lead to ultimately shelter. If I don't have rain, something like that going on, sometimes fire is my shelter. You know? So the bow, last kind of element of this. I've seen people do it with just straight pieces of wood, like maybe say this size here, and be successful. And if you can do that, I think that's great. Personally, I prefer something that's longer. I mean, you can see this is actually longer than the tips of my fingers by a good stretch. And as I'm carrying this thing around, if I carry this, yeah, it can be an issue because it can snag on things, you know, if it's in my backpack. Or I can just make a new one when I get where I'm going. But the reason I personally prefer somewhere around thumb size diameter where I'm going to be holding it, give or take a little bit, and the smaller diameter is going to be on the other end. If I've got something longer with one revolution revolution of this, that spindle is doing a lot more revolutions than if I'm doing something here, going back and forth, just wearing myself out. I can do this and just do nice and easy, and you'll see when I get down here in a minute and do this, I'm not killing myself, I'm not working hard, I'm just going to do things a certain way that makes things a little bit easier. But the reason I say that is there's more than one way to skin a cat. You know, there's more than one way to do this stuff. People are going to have preferences. I just like something that has a natural bend in it, and I like something that's longer because it's less work. And typically I'll carve a notch on the back side of my bow and make a semi-permanent knot here. And then this one down here, you can see there's no fancy knots. It's wrapped around and then tucked under because I may need to adjust this for a different size spindle in the beginning. Instead of going back and untying it and retying it, I can have it just tucked under itself and hold it in place with my hand, so that whenever I bring the spindle through, I can tell right now that's going to be too light or not tight enough for that particular spindle. So I can just come underneath, tighten it just a little bit. And that's pretty much that. I can recheck it, see if that's going to work. And that's, I can tell that's pretty snug. So I'll take, I've got the dull end and I've got the sharp pointy end. I'm right-handed, so I'm going to hold my bow out. I'm going to take and stab it down into my bow. And I've got these, this held here, and I've got these three fingers here. I can rest those on the back of the string so that whenever I twist this, instead of the string not working with me, I'm like a bear bull in a china shop. I can spin this thing around and just work it down where I can hold it with my thumb, and then I can do whatever else I need to do. But this is all set up. Ready to go. But again, it doesn't have to be bent. It doesn't have to be this long. It's just after years of doing this, requires the least amount of effort, and I get most consistency with this thing. So. Any questions up to this point on any of this? Yes?
How would it work if you cut that with the grain? What if you cut it against the grain? Like,
so, in terms of with or against the grain, I don't know of any issues with that. Because typically what's going to happen, I mean, if you do that, I think it's more work for you. And the thing is, let's say, you mean like, so let's say I cut a donut off of this right here. What's going to happen is when I put that downward force, you don't have that grain structure. So that, yeah, I never thought about that. That's a good point. But when we split it long ways, we've got that structural integrity. So I guess if it was long enough, but I don't think we could get it thick enough to not worry about splitting it out without it being too thick. That's a really good question. Good point. So I'm just going to burn this in, but when I do this, I do want to talk a little bit about form, because form is really important. Form is the number 2 reason that people don't succeed at friction fire, and it's not rocket science at all. It's really super simple stuff. You guys all remember like the green and tan army guys, the little packages, right? So I think there's a guy in there, Bazooka Joe, right? So Bazooka Joe is just like this. That dude has perfect bow drill form. He really does. Because this is a pretty natural movement here. And I'm pretty much exerting zero energy to do this. And that's going to be the path that my bow travels. You can see I'm not like this. I'm not all over. I'm straight out. And what I would tell you is modify this after you have success with it if you need to. If you have some kind of physical disability, find a workaround. I've seen guys with super bad knees, bad backs, have to sit on their butt, have their legs kicked up and have things coming underneath. Where there's a will, there's a way. If you can do it this way, this is your highest chance by using proper form, I think, of success. And then modify once this works for you. But universally, this is the way I teach it. But what I will notice always seems to happen is people want to do this, or people want to do this number here. Just be on a good level platform where I can move around, I can do whatever I need to do, and I'm not getting exhausted from being in this position here. Second thing is, if you guys will hold your arm straight out in front of you, and then take your wrist and just kick it to the side a little bit, we got a perfect little V right here. Absolutely awesome place to match up to this V that we've got going right here on our shin. So whenever I come around to actually be holding this in place, if I will just, if you, more importantly, will take and make sure that your shin is making contact from here to here, you wind up with a really good solid base and foundation. If you don't do that, this is what winds up happening. And doing this, I'm using all these muscles here and on down. If I do this, I've got a root system here, and this thing is planted firmly. Now I can adjust tilt of the angle by moving my knee around a little bit. When this happens, you guys notice that this tilted forward. I can move my wrist back. I'm still making good contact, but I can move this in any direction I need to. If I need to add downward force, I can lean in and just adjust this wrist back to make sure that it stays straight up and down. If I'm putting downward force on this guy and I'm doing it like this, we've created a weak point right here by removing material. And so if I'm putting this downward force, it's going to kick that out, and this entire front piece is going to break off, and you're going to be really frustrated, probably, and aggravated. So we want to come in and keep it as straight down as possible. What else? I think that's about that. So make sure my I want to mention this now. I'm cheating, right? That's because I'm smart. And so I've got a bearing in here which gives me 0 friction, and that's exactly what I want. If I did not have this and I was using a natural piece of material like a rock or a piece of hardwood, what's going to happen is this is going to start grinding down. So if I put a really sharp tip on here, which is good because the smaller the tip, the less friction, it's going to start wearing down though inside that. And if I don't come at this far back, get in that angle in there, and it's just up here at the top, it's going to hit those shoulders of this, and way too much friction is going to happen. So I want to come way back and angle that towards that point if I'm using natural material. If you're using natural material, do your best to cheat. There's a couple ways to do that. I have found old pop cans. I took the concave bottom off and used that. Just put my divot up in there and tap it until I've got there's no friction on that metal, that wood. If I don't have that, especially if we've been in the field for a little bit, I can take and get oil off of my face, not on the flat part, on the sharp part. I got lubricant right here. Depending on how greasy my hair is, if I'm a greaser, I may have some. Also, earwax. Anything that I can reduce friction happening here is a plus. So definitely want to do that. But I'm not going to worry about that because I put some forethought into the absolute minimum tools that I carry and made sure that I've got a bearing built into this thing. So I carry this thing with me everywhere I go, even to church. This thing, I'm not a shirt tuck guy. I've always got a shirt that's untucked, and this thing rides right here, and it's accessible for whatever I need it for. But same goes fishing, camping, whatever. This thing is always on me. So we've got our divot started here. I'm going to bring my foot as close as I can to this divot that I made without my shoe making contact where it's going to burn the sole on my shoe. So I'm going to get it pretty close. And I think the divot needs to be changed a little bit, but that's okay. I'll just use it as an example to show you guys what will happen and what will be an indicator. So got my bow, take the Sharpie in, stab it down in, bring it back through. And if this thing happens to loosen up on me, and I start notice when I'm doing this string is slipping on this, where my fingers are holding this, I can just squeeze that, and now I'm tightening that string on this spindle. So I want to try and get it somewhere in the middle-ish. Again, this spindle's a little bit long for me, but I think we can get it to serve its purpose. I've got it down inside its divot. I've got contact almost all the way up to this thumb joint here. And whenever I start spinning this, it's just going to be right across through there. And if this wood is fairly dry, it shouldn't be very long. And we'll start. You see how that popped out? We'll try it one more time, but I think that divot needs to be adjusted. So, if you guys can see, maybe not from there, this front side is definitely down further than the back side of it. So, if I don't pay attention to that, I'm probably just going to get really mad and frustrated and go cold without a fire. When it comes to this stuff, slow down, take your time. It's life and death stuff. It's worth taking your time and doing it right and not rushing through this. So I'm just going to come to the back side of this. I'm going to make that divot a little bit deeper. And at any point, if you guys have questions, like I said, I'm a pretty informal guy, so if I'm doing something, don't hesitate to interrupt or interject. I don't mind. Yeah.
Would it help to leave some of the burrs on there instead of trying to cut it out so smoothly?
I don't think it matters. I mean, it's going to grind down anyways. As long as that spindle gets down in there and will actually ride, I wouldn't really be concerned one way or the other. I clean it up as good as I can, but it's got a couple things, imperfections in there. But if I can just get it to ride, all that's going to grind away anyhow. And this too can come into play. It may be universal in there in terms of the depth, but if I have this tilted forward, it's going to tend to want to kick out. So that comes into play, getting that thing level too, and placing your foot on it. If I've got the tip of my toes on it, you can see I just tilted it back. So I'm going to try and use my foot right on the ball-ish area to try and make sure this hearthboard is as level as possible. One other thing I can do, I'm using this just a little bit more.
What do you call that board?
This board?
Yeah.
A hearth board?
Hearth board.
I call it a fire board because I'm okay. But people will say it's a hearth. And let me know my place. Well, you don't know that's called hearth board? Yeah, just don't care. Exactly. One other thing I can do, if it is popping out, I can also kind of angle this on the edges. And it's rounding it just a little bit, but not to the point to where as it grinds down, it's going to come up and hit those shoulders, which is what I want. But if I round it just a little bit in the initial stages, it may help it to stay in that divot until it gets to the point where you see the smoke that you want to see. can feel a lot of jarring around where it's trying to match up and even up. It's a little closer to the edge than I would like, but the way this thing kind of bounced back. And the reason I say it's a little closer to the edge, there's a possibility that this will split out. But I've got this perfectly matched this, so now I'll get consistent friction going all